So, what's your vision for the lab?
So in this lab, we want to understand the basic drivers of human decision making and investigate how people really make decisions. Do they follow their goals? Do they act out of habit? Or do physiological needs play a role? What is the role of value in these decisions? And we want to see how all of these factors interplay with each other. We're fascinated with questions about why sometimes we do things that are maybe not so good for us, and why sometimes we don't do things that are good for us. And investigating this is the core goal of the lab, and we use two models to do this. One model is experiments. We do a lot of experiments, sometimes online experiments, sometimes in-person lab experiments. We have done and will keep doing psychophysiological experiments. So that's one half of the lab, and the other half of the lab is we build computer models to simulate these patterns of behavior for human beings, and that gives us another way to understand why people do what we do.
Can you give me an overview of the research projects that are going on in the lab right now?
Sure, happy to. So our overarching research project is to build a new model of value-based decision making. When I say value-based decision making, we're talking about decisions in which preference plays a role. So chocolate or vanilla, marrying John or Sam, taking a job as a computer person or a shepherd in the hills. These are all examples of value-based decision-making, and our overarching project is to understand the nature of value-based decision-making. More specifically, we have projects specifically in three areas. One is the area of perception and decision-making, how what we want to see influences what we see. That is one major area of growth for our lab. Another area where we're doing a lot of work is investigating the classic problems of decision making, like the Asian disease problem, first talked about by Kahneman and Tversky, and trying to build models to simulate and really understand the dynamics of that problem. And the third is all things related to our emotions and emotion regulation. We have problems to understand, projects to understand emotion perception, how that happens. And here too, we do empirical work as well as model-based work. Truth is, if it relates to why people do the things that we do, we're interested in it. We're not bound by very rigid boundary conditions. We do have some methods, some empirical methods and some model-based methods that we keep coming back to because they're useful, but we're flexible. I think that's probably the hallmark of the projects in the lab.
Cool. And what kind of culture are you trying to develop in the lab?
Yeah, this is really important to me. I think it's fair to say that we want to do science because we want to work with smart and fun people, and the culture we want to develop in the lab, and I think we have in the lab, is a free-flowing culture where people collaborate. We don't think it should be hyper-competitive, where people are critical of each other's science. We want to build a culture where we're supporting each other. That's really important to me. I think there's a lot of smart people in the world, and there's a lot of nice people in the world. And we're really interested in the intersection of people who are smart and nice. I think that's the culture that we have right now and we want to keep.
Okay. So on that note, what kinds of people do you want to attract to the lab?
Great question. So the basic fit involves the person being really curious about the human condition. What makes us tick? Why do we do the things that we do? These are things that are almost a prerequisite for becoming a psychologist. They're probably really even more important in our lab because we study motivated decision making. But over and above that, we're looking for people who have perhaps some experience with doing experiments by themselves or as a part of a team. So they should have some knowledge of the empirical experimental method in psychology, and or they should be somewhat sophisticated, or at least have a willingness to get sophisticated in terms of running computer models. And that often involves knowing a programming language like R or MATLAB, and we're really flexible there. And so we don't expect people to have these tools when they necessarily have these tools when they come in, but because about half the lab's work is modeling based, we do have a natural affinity for people who are either interested in that already or are open to learning that. That's not to say people who only want to do empirical work are not welcome. They certainly are. But probably the best sweet spot fit is people who are open to doing modeling and simulation.
Okay. And what kinds of things do people do after they leave the lab?
Right. So we're a young lab. I started in the university a couple years ago. We've had our first graduate. She's gone on to do a PhD in marketing from the University of California. And I expect that we will have people, because of their coding sophistication, some of whom are going to go into the technology world. But I think the dominant majority of people who come to our lab are going to do their PhD in psychology, either in cognitive psychology or in some aspect of experimental social psychology. I'm really passionate about writing papers with our lab members. I've already written a paper with you, and hopefully we'll continue the tradition that people coming out of this lab come out with publications and come out with applications that are really attractive to PhD programs. Not everybody is going to take that journey. Some people are going to go straight into the industry after their graduation from this program, but I expect many will get their PhD.
Cool, thank you.
All right, thank you.